So if you're going to have, تداينتم بدين إلى أجل مسمى, if you're going to take a business loan transaction until a set deadline, فاكتبوه, then document it. Allah says write it down. Don't take loan agreements without having proper documentation. So you should have legitimate documentation even when you're taking a personal loan. Now, of course, banks and things like that, they do a lot of due diligence and they do their homework and they make you sign 85,000 papers and here's what you have to sign. Okay. And you don't know which one signs off your leg and which one signs off your left eye or something. You're just signing because you're not going to read any of that, But anyway, among family, friends and things like that, you might give a loan and you just say it's a favor, don't worry about it. Just, I know you'll pay me back next year. No, don't do that. You should still what? Write it down. You should still have some documentation, right? Now, problem with this instruction in Medina was what? Most people don't know how to write. فَلْيَكْتُبْ بَيْنَكُمْ كَاتِبٌ بِالْعَدْلِ. Then a writer should be writing this down among you. Some writer, Allah says katibun, a writer. He doesn't say a believing writer. He doesn't say a person of taqwa. He just says a person who knows how to write. Now the person who knows how to write, he receives an education not with the Prophet ﷺ. He didn't learn to write from the Prophet ﷺ, because the Prophet himself does not know how to write. So he got his education, the writer got his education from some other source. And I would argue an un-Islamic source, a secular source. Didn't he? And without that writer, you would not be able to fulfill this ayah. Because the ayah requires a writer. And this writer got his secular education elsewhere. But this writer says, I don't want to write it down for you, I'm busy. But Medina is not it's not filled with writers, people who are able to write. So the few people who can write, now you've heard the concept of jury duty, right? Where you're called into court as a responsibility of your citizenship. Well, the few people who were capable of writing were now called upon to say if there is a business transaction and you are being asked to write, then you shouldn't refuse. You should come and write it down because it's your civic duty to help the people who want to make business transactions because they're not capable of doing it. Right? So Allah says, وَلَا يَأْبَ كَاتِبٌ. No writer should refuse. أَنْ يَكْتُبَ, to write things down. Now this is the part that really gets me. كَمَا عَلَّمَهُ اللَّهُ فَلْيَكْتُبْ. No writer should refuse writing things down just as Allah had taught him. So he should write it down. Wait, He didn't learn from the Prophet. He didn't learn from the angel Jibreel. He learned from some place how to write. Some other place. And what did he learn to write? Business contracts. Accounting, finance, isn't it? Which we today call a secular field, isn't it? And Allah's language is the way Allah taught him. كَمَا عَلَّمَهُ اللَّهُ. Now if you look at the word allama in the Quran, to teach, Allah says, وَيُعَلِّمُكُمُ اللَّهُ مَا لَمْ تَكُونُوا تَعْلَمُونَ وَيُعَلِّمُكُم مَا لَمْ تَكُونُوا تَعْلَمُونَ وَيُعَلِّمُكُمُ اللَّهُ وَاللَّهُ بِكُلِّ شَيْءٍ عَلِيمٌ. Allah is teaching you and Allah knows everything. Allah teaches you what you couldn't possibly have known yourselves. Allah says, عَلَّمَ الْقُرْآنِ. He taught the Quran. And now he says he taught the accountant how to write the language of accounting and finance and business transactions. He on the one hand talks about he taught revelation, and now he's talking about teaching business agreements. Why? Because Allah is now making all knowledge, all human knowledge, so long as it benefits society in some way, all of it is sacred to Allah. Knowledge itself is sacred to Allah. And He takes credit for it Himself. You may have learned from your teacher. You may have learned, for example, the language of science from your teacher, who may have learned it from his teacher, who may have learned it from his teacher. And you keep going further back and you're going to end up at the first human being, Adam alayhi salam. And Adam alayhi salam did not know any words until Allah taught him names for all things. Allama Adam al-asma. I've said this several times, I'll repeat myself just because it ties into this concept. Every subject you study, whether you're studying the language of, if you're studying science or history or politics, whatever you're studying, every subject has terminology. If you're studying grammar, it has terminology. Yeah, a lot of terminology, right? If you're studying tafsir, it has terminology. If you're studying, finance, it has its own terminology. If you're studying programming, it has its own terminology, isn't it? And what is terminology? Certain special words that have a special definition, isn't it? That's what they are. And at every textbook, at the end, there's a glossary of terms, because you need to be familiar with these terms. Now, terminology, names for things, is in Arabic al-asma. And these names came about from previous things. We had more basic names for things. As our knowledge advanced, we used those basic elements and created more advanced names, and then created more advanced names and created more advanced names, isn't it? So terminology keeps getting more and more and more what? Advanced. So we have names for more and more and more things. So keep going back. We keep naming newer things. You keep going back, there are lesser and lesser names, lesser and lesser names, lesser and lesser names, until you go far back enough. It's Adam alayhi salam, and Allah says Allah taught him terminologies for all things. Allah taught him the names for al-asma'a kullaha. In other words, every science that is made up of any terminology is actually a great grandchild of the same vocabulary that was once given to who? Adam alayhi salam, which means all of it is revealed by Allah. All of it. All knowledge and science that human beings discover is actually inspired to the human beings. Kama allamahu Allah, as Allah had taught him. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. If you enjoyed this video, please do share it with friends and family.